There's a saying that all political careers end in tears. Now we might add that the ending of all political careers is met with celebration. Justin Trudeau has recently announced that he intends to step down as the Prime Minister of Canada after 10 years. And looking at the way in which this is responded to, it's quite difficult to find examples of people who are truly saddened by this development. Of course, not counting Trudeau himself and the people who are close to him. So there have been several accounts or attempts to explain this phenomenon. And what is quite remarkable about this development is the extent to which Trudeau has fallen from grace when considering just how popular he was several years ago as opposed to how unpopular he is today. The Telegraph has reported that in order to understand this important development in Canada, we have to consider 5 graphs. The first is approval ratings. Trudeau's approval ratings have dropped from 65% in September 2016 to 22% in December 2024. Number 2, the unemployment rate. Unemployment in Canada has been steadily increasing since 2022, with 6.8% of the population now unemployed. Unemployment in Canada has increased by 22% since 2023. The third is the housing crisis. When Trudeau took office in November 2015, the average house in Canada was 446,000 Canadian dollars. 9 years later, this figure stood at 732,000 after peaking at 834 in March 2022. The fourth has to do with polling with regard to Liberals and Conservatives and their support in Canada. The most recent polling shows that the Conservatives' Pierre Poilievre is at 44% in the polls, which is more than double that of Trudeau and the Liberals, who are currently at 20.1%. And lastly, some quite remarkable polls that have to do with the way in which Canadians think their leaders would be able to deal with President-elect Donald Trump. Only 14% of Canadians believe that Trudeau is best equipped to handle the American president-elect, while 44% say that Poilievre would be best. Now, these are damning statistics for any politician, and it should be enough reason for any politician to resign. And we have been told that this is, of course, the reason why Trudeau is resigning. But we should also keep in mind that politicians have a very remarkable ability to cling to power despite plummeting approval ratings and despite obvious failures within the country that they are trying to govern. And so we are told that the actual reason why Trudeau is resigning should be understood. And the actual reason is that there's an election coming up and that the Liberal Party or the establishment within the ruling Liberal Party in Canada has concluded that they would not be able to win the upcoming election with Trudeau as their candidate. And so the real reason, we are told, is that the Liberal Party is shaking itself up, preparing for the election, very similar to the way in which the Democratic Party in America got rid of Joe Biden shortly before the election. Now, this is probably true, but I would go as far as to say that this is still not the actual reason. This development, Trudeau's resignation, and the internal friction within the Liberal Party should much rather be seen as a symptom of another, much more deeply rooted phenomenon. And I want to discuss this with reference to Patrick Deneen's recent book, Regime Change, in which he spends quite some time to discuss the historic and contemporary friction between what might be described as the upper classes and the lower classes, or the elites and the people. But this is not entirely a new phenomenon, the fact that there is friction between those who govern and those who are being governed. In fact, this friction goes back to ancient times, as far back as ancient Rome, for example, with the friction between the ruling patricians and the ruled plebeians. The plebeians at a certain stage started to experience that even though they are contributing through things like taxation, participating in the military, and fulfilling all sorts of responsibility, they're not sufficiently represented in government. And so the plebeians back in ancient Rome staged a mass walkout, leading to some political developments and some political reforms in order to ensure that the plebeians are also represented in the system. And so the view that developed during the times of the Roman Republic was that the best regime is a mixed regime, or the best political system is a mixed political system. In other words, one in which different sections of society are represented and in which all can contribute in their unique ways to the collective whole. Now, even though this system developed organically in ancient Rome, it's very comparable to the ways in which the ancient Greeks thought about this, with Plato, for example, arguing in the Republic that a healthy and a sustainable society is one that is based on the principle of harmony, which according to Plato was the foundation of justice. And when he spoke about harmony, what Plato had in mind was that each citizen and each section of society fulfill their place by contributing to the common good of the community in their unique ways. Yet the ideologies that we have gotten used to today, the modern ideologies that underpin our political systems and our ways of thinking about politics, are primarily underpinned by a rejection of our traditional ways of thinking about these issues, and especially about our traditional ways of thinking about politics and how community life ought to be structured. But it's not just that. Those in power today have built their frame of reference on one that dictates to us that we ought to reject our understanding of reality. This is because the so-called road to progress, as they see it, implies or demands of us to reject our traditional ways of thinking about what we experience in the real world and accepting their ideological prescriptions, which becomes the lens through which we have to understand reality. And so it is demanded of us by today's political elites to reject reality in terms of how things are, to reject reality in terms of what we learn from experience, and also to reject reality about human nature. Practically speaking, what this means is that we have to reject basic realities about science and biology. We have to reject basic realities in terms of what we know to be true from experience as the consequences of progressive economic policy. And we are called upon to reject our natural proclivity to wish to preserve our communal identities, to cherish things such as our ability to protect ourselves, to protect our families, and our natural proclivity to think of borders as something that is healthy and necessary to protect our communities. And in as far as we don't accept this, or in as far as we don't agree, we are accused of being all sorts of villainous or evil things, whether that be populist, authoritarian, or even a bunch of things that are much worse than that. And this is exactly the type of sentiment that underpinned Barack Obama's comment when he remarked as far back as 2008 that important sections of American society get bitter. They cling to guns or religion or antipathy to people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations. It was also evident in the remarks made by Hillary Clinton in America when she described people who don't agree with her political policies and programs and who opted to support Donald Trump instead as a basket of deplorables. Going even further, calling them racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. It was also evident in the remarks made by the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer when he responded to the riots in Southport after the murder of 3 innocent girls, accusing those who were rioting of far-right thuggery. And of course, this was also evident in the remarks made by Justin Trudeau in Canada when he accused people who didn't agree with his lockdown as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic of being misogynists and racists. The underlying point here is that the political zeitgeist of our time has become characterized by extreme levels of mistrust between the people and those who are supposed to represent the people. This is not a phenomenon that is unique to Canada, but unfortunately it seems to be especially true in Canada. But this is ironic for 2 reasons. Firstly, because these levels of mistrust are the result of a political system that claims to be built on the basic notion of representing the people. And secondly, because they also sprout from political ideologies that at its core, in theory at least, claim to wish to promote the interests of the people and especially the working class. Yet reality has made it clear that this is not how these political systems and these ideologies play out in real life. And so we've gotten to this bizarre point where those who are supposed to represent the people and those who claim to represent the people now view the people as the single biggest barrier to progress, demanding of the people to change their way of thinking, their way of living, and so forth, as the only way to actually achieve the progress that they foresee as a result of the ideologies that they cling to. And so when these political elites claim that they wish to promote the interests of the people, we should understand that what they are actually saying is that the people need to change who they are. They need to change how they think, and they need to change how they behave in order to fit their ideological prescriptions on what constitutes the good, which at its core is based on a rejection of our classical and traditional Western way of thinking about the community, about the fulfillment of our responsibilities towards each other, about family life, about preserving the things that we have inherited, and so forth. And so we are called upon to join the program by rejecting the basic facts about the nature of things. And so it's no wonder that a term like populism has become a curse word used by political elites in today's political zeitgeist. And so if we wish to understand the fall of Justin Trudeau, we need to understand not just the statistics I mentioned, not just the fact that there's an election coming up and so forth. We need to understand the very crisis that underpins modern or contemporary politics in most of the Western world. The fact that political elites today have become so detached from the people, and that their response to this detachment is not to reconsider what they think, but to demand of the people to change their way of thinking. And as a result, it's obvious and predictable that there would be a backlash. And so many people have been saying that the world has experienced a backlash in 2016 with Brexit and with the election of Donald Trump, and now again in 2024 with Trump's re-election and with various political outcomes in Europe. But I believe it's safe to say that what we have witnessed over the last few years is just the beginning of a fundamental political and ideological realignment in the Western world.